feel like the wilderness. We just look at our current events. Fears around coronavirus, stock market. Fears inside the United Methodist Church of how the church will hold together, or will the church hold together. Doubts and concerns of more personal nature that we bring with us wherever we go. Indeed, being in the wilderness, which is our theme for tonight, being in the wilderness is being in a place of uncertainty, a place of doubt, a place where we're disoriented. So we cling to Christ in this season because Christ himself traversed the wilderness, literally and illustratively. And our scripture this morning gives us a great window into Christ's journey in the wilderness. I was reading an article in Psychology Today online by a psychologist named Leslie Becker Phelps. And the article was entitled, "It Takes Courage to Face Your Dark Side." And I quote her from this article, "No matter what your goal is, every answer requires that you face your fears. You must confront the parts of yourself that you prefer would just disappear, or that you have disowned. Facing the parts of yourself that you don't like or are afraid of is one of the most difficult tasks in life, perhaps the most difficult task." I think we can all relate to that experience. I don't know about you all, but I tend to like to do the easiest thing first and then go on to the more difficult things if I have the time and inclination. Of course, what that kind of prioritizing does is it saves the hardest problems for last. When we save the hardest challenges and problems for last, they can become so daunting, so ingrained, so entrenched, that it feels like we can never overcome them, that we can never rise above them, that we can never clear them out of the way. There's a reason why we have kind of the very common phrase, you've got to face your demons. You've got to face your demons. And this is where Jesus is at in the wilderness for a period of 40 days. Lent, a period of 40 days. Testing of journeying, reflection, of discipline. 40 is significant throughout the scriptures in lots of places. Two that come to mind for this morning. 40 days Moses remained on the mountaintop while God dictated the commandments. 40 years in the wilderness. The nation of Israel, having been freed from slavery in Egypt, wandered, tempted by hunger and idolatry. Some connections there. Jesus, too, we see is tempted by hunger and idolatry. You know, it was in the wilderness that the ancient Israelites received the manna, the bread that God provided. And like the manna, the lesson from the manna is that God is the one who nourishes. So we see Jesus being tempted by the devil. If you are the Son of God, command these stones to become loaves of bread. It is written, do not, Jesus replies, it is written, one does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. Now, it's tempting to think of this oversimplistically as just Jesus being tempted because he spent all this time in the wilderness and was for super hunger. And yeah, of course, going for long periods without food does make one hungry. But as we go through these three challenges that Jesus faces in the wilderness, it's important to see another dimension. This is not a moral dimension where Jesus is shoring up his discipline against a moral temptation. This is shaping up who Jesus is going to be in terms of the coming Messiah. And so the temptation, commanding these stones to become loaves of bread, is a temptation to be a Messiah who feeds those who are hungry. And indeed, we see he does that in feeding miracles throughout the gospel. But this is a shortcut. If you're the Son of God, command these stones to become loaves of bread. This can be the defining feature of your ministry, Messiah. Give people the bread that they need right out of the gate. It's tempting. Tempting for Jesus, who's come as the bread from heaven. One who wants to nourish. But nourishing is not the primary goal of Messiah. Similarly, with the second temptation, if you're the Son of God, throw yourself down from the pinnacle of this temple, for it is written, he will command the angels concerning you, and on their hands they will bear you up, so you will not dash your foot against the stone. The surface temptation, of course, is show everybody how divine you are, how blessed you are, how empowered you are, that even if you wanted to, the angels would come and rescue you, jump from the pinnacle of the temple. There's some truth in that. But the deeper temptation is that out of the gate, Messiah is going to act divine or act human. Like the bread miracle. Jesus did do feeding miracles, but it wasn't his primary purpose. Here, Jesus is the divine Son of God, but that's not his primary way of relating as Messiah to the people in the world. Of course he's divine and human, and of course we see his work as divine, but he doesn't come as the almighty Son of God with an army of angels ready to do the divine final redemption of all things. The third challenge. The devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their splendor. All these I will give to you if you fall down and worship me. Certainly the surface temptation is to have authority over all the kingdoms of the world. Jesus wants every knee to bow and every tongue to confess. But as Messiah, he's not going to do it by taking the throne of every human king. The temptation is that, sure, Son of God, Messiah, come and take over every human kingdom. Be that warrior king that everybody's waiting for. Resisting this temptation is realizing that his kingdom is not of this world. Even when he faces Pilate, you the king of the Jews? Make sure to say his kingdom is not of this world. So the real temptation for Christ here in the wilderness as he begins his journey, yeah, sure, there's these very tangible temptations of hunger and of protection and of lordship. But the deep, deep, deep temptation, the one that he must have really wrestled with, is instead of being the divine conquering Messiah who comes in glory and power right away, instead he comes as the suffering servant, the one who takes upon himself all of the suffering and all of the insecurity and all of the shame of human existence. Sure, he walks through the temptations that we all walk through in our journeys as we decide what kind of Christians are we going to be. And take your pick. There's denial, addiction, fear, doubt, regret, sin, pleasure, entertainment, wealth, beauty. Any one of these are obstacles for us to overcome on our journey. But the deeper temptation for all of us is, what kind of Christians are we going to be? Are we going to trust in every word that comes from God, even when we go home? Are we going to go with courage into each new day, knowing that God goes with us, even when it looks dangerous, even when it looks threatening? And are we going to be aligned with not the kingdoms of this world and seek to be powerful in those places, but to align with the kingdom of heaven that's coming, that's unfolding, that's breaking in, that Jesus ushered in wherever he went? The kingdom of God is coming. So as we journey through Lent, here this first Sunday in Lent, we look to see that we have the very same work to do that Jesus did in the wilderness. We have to be willing to live the life and the calling that God has for us, not that we have for ourselves. We have to maybe subdue our own will in a way, in obedience to God's will. And we may have to suffer, we will have to suffer some experiences that are uncomfortable, some emotions that are uncomfortable, some trials that are uncomfortable. It means doing the hard thing that we always tend to leave to last. It's doing the hard thing that looks so entrenched, so insurmountable, we've been too afraid to take on, that we've tried to avoid or deny and hide. The nature of leaving the hard things, those hard obstacles that we have to overcome, the nature of leaving them for last is it makes them so difficult when we finally get to them. If you've been following in the daily devotionals that we've given for this season, Sam McLaughlin, our author, says, I'm wondering what we could lose, recover, and rediscover about ourselves by facing our demons instead of fleeing from them. As we face the wilderness, we too are tended to by a heavenly host. And here's the practice for today. What do you need to face instead of flee? One way to find out is to map out the last month Write down 5 significant moments or events. If you were to draw the terrain of your last month, would it be mountainous, a flowing river, or a deep wood? I encourage everyone today and this week to find those obstacles. We know where they are. Find those obstacles and overcome them. Make a start at scaling or removing. God's got a great journey ahead. Yes, through the Lenten season, but way beyond that. A life waiting to be blessed with the will and purpose of God as God has planned it from the beginning. The only thing standing in our way, the demons we let take up residence between us and God. Let's pray. God, we're thankful this day to reflect on Christ's time in the wilderness, and that by his example, we see your faithfulness. As we are in the wilderness this Lent, as we are in our own wilderness, as we journey to stay close to you, help us face those things that we've been too scared to face, or that it seemed too difficult for us to face. Those very things that keep us from growing closer to you and closer in our walk with Christ. We pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen. It's what this communion table is for.